My medical training started over 30 years ago, and as a special forces medic. I wanted to learn medicine, I guess. I started down to North Carolina and finished that up in Goat Lab, which is incredibly stressful. Incredible. I went over this one jump and landed in the sand, and I just heard to pop. Pulled a piece of the bone, the tendon stretches.
Hey, welcome back to another episode of Crashing Convos. In this episode, we have Sam Coffman, ex-Green Beret Medic. Sam has taught herbalism for over 30 years and has worked as a clinical herbalist for over 15 years. Sam and his wife, Suchil, also founded Herbal Medics in 2011 as an outreach organization and gives their students and interns an opportunity to work in the field while providing free healthcare and education to underserved communities. They have worked in Nicaragua, Mexico, and all the USA, both to provide post-disaster relief at free herbal clinics, education and sustainable medicine, food projects. Sam currently serves on the board of Taos Search and Rescue and is also part of the Canine Search and Rescue team together with his dog Lucy. His book Herbal Medic has been in the top 3 best-selling books, story publishing for the past 2 years. So without further ado, welcome Sam Coffman. Welcome back to another podcast, Crashing Combos. He has a vast wealth of knowledge and experience, and I fortunately got to see his place in New Mexico when we went on our way up to Colorado last year. And I was just in awe. It's right against, if you guys, mountain bikers, right about, it's in Taos, right near the South Pondy Trail. So it kind of gives you a frame of reference. But it's beautiful. I can't imagine what it is there now. You guys got snow on the ground?
We have a lot of snow on the ground, especially when you get up into the woods. Yeah, we were doing search and rescue yesterday with canine with my dog Lucy, and I didn't put my snowshoes on because the trail going back in there had some cross-country ski tracks and it was fine. And then I got out, and once I had to get off to go, because I was subject. Oh no, we were searching first, and so the guy that was the subject, who was a teammate, was going out there, and as soon as I got into that, I was like, almost hip deep in places. And I was like, oh man, I should have put on the snowshoes. But then it's like, do I go back? And then we had a limited amount of sunlight left, and it's like, man. So I ended up fighting through knee to hip deep snow most of yesterday. So yeah, we got lots of snow here for sure.
Oh man, yeah, it's been pretty crazy here. It's no snow here in Texas, but we got temperatures down in the teens last week, and this week it's nice and sunny, and we just got dumped on with a bunch of rain, probably all the same moisture you guys got, but we just got it in the form of rain, which we need, because it's pretty wild, like how you could see a lot of our lakes have just like hundreds of feet away from the shoreline, and it's wild to see, and it's kind of sad, but at the same time I hope we got the rain in the right areas, but yeah, either way. I mean, I know we're not meteorologists, but that's just kind of the reality of our world.
Yeah, and San Antonio, I mean, that's of course how I met your wife Sandy. We both went to the acupuncture school to get our master's degree in acupuncture and oriental medicine there in San Antonio, and we lived there for 15 years, really. Well, almost 16 years, I guess. And I remember the first year we moved down there was 2007, and I had just gotten into med school there, actually, at UTESCA. And that year was there was so much water. I mean, I remember driving down there. I had a little Kia that I bought, basically as a city car. And I mean, it was like, constantly having to deal with turning around, turn around, don't drown. And it was like that way that whole year. And then, gosh, you go fast forward about 5 or 6 years later, and there was something like 3 years in a row where there was, minimal rain, and it was this huge drought for so long. And all the lakes there just kind of started disappearing.
Yeah. So yeah, that's good. I mean, you know what I'm talking about. I forget for whatever reason. I know that, but I somehow forgot that you were here. Not that bright sometimes. But yeah, so if you could kind of just get a little bit in your background, or like how you got to where you're at now.
Sure. Yeah. So I run a school called Herbal Medics Academy, aka the Human Path, and it's it's an outdoor. It's a lot of ways to describe it. We cover so many subjects that relate to outdoor and wilderness training and wilderness first aid, wilderness first responder certification, of course, but also beyond that, austere medicine, and then really, I think the biggest are by far our largest curriculum and our largest revenue for students is the herbal medicine portion of it. So herbal medicine from a Western standpoint, but also from a TCM or traditional Chinese medicine standpoint. Now that I have my MSAOM and I'm actually able to practice and work with that as well. My medical training started over 30 years ago in 1980. Well, herbally, I was probably interested in it and just checking stuff out and doing some different courses and reading a lot of books in 1980, 87 or so. But I went back into the military, my second time back in the military as a special forces medic. The first time was I was an interrogator in 97 Echo. It was a 96 Charlie back when I started, and then they changed the MOS a few years later. But but it was basically the same thing. So I was a interrogator, which really meant I was a linguist. I was a liaison and a translator and an interpreter in the east, along the east-western border back in the days when there still was one. So it's 1982 to 1986. Got out, went to school, got my degree in linguistics, and then came back into the military, the special forces. And I wanted to be a medic. I wanted to learn medicine, I guess. I started getting interested. So that was 1989 to 1995. So it was my second time around. And so during that period of time, I got very into herbal medicine as a way to integrate that with allopathic care, or with Western pharmaceutical medicine, especially in the field. The mission of a special forces medic really at that time was very much focused on austere medicine. Things kind of changed during a lot of the urban stuff that happened in the Middle East. And so the mission had changed a period, but it's going back to that. And they're calling it prolonged field care, but it basically is austere medicine. So that, the medic portion of the 18 Delta course back then was 1 year long, just the medic alone. That was phase one. They called it phase one. And you still had 2 other phases to go, assuming you got through the selection to get in there in the first place. And that was back then, the 300 F1 course, it was in San Antonio. That's how I met my wife. I'm originally from Colorado, but I met her down there. And that was the first 8 months was there. And then the last part of it was called Goat Lab or Med Lab, was in North Carolina, of course, at Fort Bragg, and then Camp McCall. But that portion of it was I would say the whole medic portion of it, of that phase one, is kind of like, I say it for me, I would say in retrospect, it was kind of like a cross between a combat paramedic and sort of a meatball level nurse practitioner. Like if you put those two worlds together, because you had to be able to function in an austere setting, right? I mean, your medical director, an MD or a DO might be 2,000 miles away, and it's up to you. And that was formed on the idea back in the Vietnam War of like an SF team could go into, say, a village and could create out of a small village, could create a battalion-sized force as sort of a leadership functional thing. And the medic was sort of the backbone of that, because of course back then the idea was, well, hearts and minds, austere medicine. One day you might be delivering a child, the next day you might be a broken arm, and the next day it might be an epidemic of flu or something. Whatever, you had to be able to deal with all of those things. And that's very much the kind of medicine that I like, that I was really into anyway. And then like, how do we take herbal medicine and combine that with it? So that really was the beginning of kind of my journey over 30 years ago. And then it became a school. My idea was to start a school, and I started the first version, the 1.0 version, back in Manitou Springs, Colorado, again, about 28 years ago or so, maybe. And it just didn't take off. I didn't have the resources or the training or the experience to really be able to pull it off. It was sort of a summertime only thing. And it was fun. I mean, I really, it got my survival skills up, my kind of solo, I would say survival skills, because I tested myself on all of that stuff all the time. I'd go into the woods with just a knife and an elk skin. That was everything. And I'd stay out there for many days, maybe weeks even sometimes, and just, foraging, all of those things, living off the land, learning, friction fire, all the things that I had to do to be better at that. And then, of course, herbal medicine was always kind of a component of that too. And then fast forward, I had to raise a family, and fast forward about 15 years, and I started the version 2.0 in San Antonio, Texas, when we went down there. As I mentioned, I had kind of given up on the school idea, because raising a family and making a living and everything, I decided at some point, I was like, you know what? I'm going to try to get into med school. So I went back to work full time, went to school part-time to get all my pre-med stuff done, and MCAT and all that. And I got into a bunch of med schools, but I was 42 when I started down there in Uteska, San Antonio, and some stuff happened financially, and I really had to choose between family or med school. And so I walked away from med school, and within 6 months of that, this property kind of dropped in my lap, a 50-acre property up in North San Antonio, hill country there. which is now suburbia almost. But back at the time, it was very, you know how much that area has grown, but back then it was really almost kind of like being out in the middle of nowhere, even though you're just off of 281, you know, up kind of towards Bulverde. So that became the version 2.0, and it just took off like crazy. I mean, it just like, it was amazing. And so I just started creating curriculum, and by that point I was ready, you know, and I was able to do it. And so at the time we did everything from like, you know, bow making and blacksmithing and, you know, wilderness survival and urban survival and post-disaster survival were kind of a part of it, along with lots and lots and lots of herbal medicine, you know, but a lot of stuff in the field. And it just slowly, it kind of all distilled down to what it is today, which is really focused on medicine more than anything. So even though we do those other skills, they're more as a support of herbal medicine. So like if we used to have all kinds of scout classes where it was kind of cool, you know, the ninja in the woods at night kind of stuff, you know, the scout, that when you hear people talk about scout in most survival schools, that's what it is. And it doesn't really have a practical application, but for us it does. We call it the medical advance party. And it's like, yeah, you need to know land navigation. You need to know how to survive in a maybe a potentially hostile environment, whether it's here in a post-disaster in the United States or it's in a different country, because we have a outreach group and we go to other places, you know, other countries. So any of those things, you have to know how to do sort of an advanced reconnaissance medically, as well as an on-site reconnaissance, both medically and in terms of everything from security to, of course, the epidemiology of the culture of the area, the language, all the stuff that has to happen in order to be able to have a successful medical mission of any sort. So we have a course for that, literally, that kind of distills down a lot of those skills and a lot of that stuff that we had before that was more kind of survival then. So the overall, I would say, curriculum of the course has certainly become much deeper and less broad. And then the actual purpose of what we learn has become very, very focused, I think. And that's been wonderful because, again, our outreach organization is able to provide free healthcare and other things like water purification, you know, slow sand water for purification. We've done that in the middle of the jungle, east coast of Nicaragua with the Rama Indian tribes. We've done
Oh,
all over outside of, you know, abroad, as well as here in the country, places that are really underserved, both urban and extremely, extremely, you know, rural and remote. A lot of Native American nation type stuff, as well as just like the middle of West Virginia, Coal Valley, where there's, you know, the nearest healthcare is 2 hour drive away, you know, and the nearest food is a convenience store, really, of anything for a whole population. So anyway, with all that said, the school and everything I've done has kind of had a life of its own, you know, that's picked up off of things. And my own journey for me personally has been to become better as a practitioner of herbal medicine as well as integrative medicine, both as, you know, from a TCM perspective now, and integrating that with Western herbalism and integrating all of that together with allopathic care. And I have doctors, functional medicine MDs and DOs that I've worked with, NPs that I work with on a regular basis. We have an entire store that started out as really more of a formulary for those docs, and then eventually became kind of public facing because docs are using my formulas and they're working. And so that all has kind of had its life of its own as well. So I think that, and we have like 2 MDs on our faculty. We have a PhD on our faculty. We have a nurse practitioner on our faculty. So there's a lot of integration, everything we do, with what's going on in our healthcare system, you know, quote unquote,
mhm.
for good reason. Both, I mean that both figured, you know, that's as,
I, I'm tracking. Yeah.
yeah. So yeah, there's good and bad there, right? But at the same time, also growing what I do as a practitioner, becoming better as a clinician. And I think TCM, traditional Chinese medicine, has helped me on an herbal level very much with that, because I'm able to get a lot deeper into layers of what I think are sources of issues that are otherwise just kind of, like I always say, like playing whack-a-mole with herbs. If you approach it from a Western standpoint, it's like, well, you know, you've got somebody who's, you know, 55 years old, perimenopausal, can't stop gaining weight, thyroid, you know, Hashimoto's thyroiditis, you know, blood glucose issues, cortisol's out of control, stress, all that stuff. You can't just, you know, say, well, let's deal with this, and then let's do it, and then something else pops up and you deal with that. And that's how pharmaceutical medicine really deals with it. But the difference is that pharmaceutical medicine is much more pinpointed and can actually change, you know, hormone levels, for instance, in a certain way, that even though it still isn't fixing the cause in any shape, way, or form, herbal medicine isn't as potent in that specific way. It's a more underlying, when you talk about plant medicine, you're talking about tens of thousands of constituents, maybe. So as opposed to a single molecule or a single compound. So there's a whole different way you have to approach that. But the paradigm of saying Western, hey, let's, go after one hormone at a time just doesn't work. But the paradigm of traditional Chinese medicine, herbally, is incredible, because you can actually get to the underlying causes from a different paradigm and a different perspective. So I found that's added a whole different layer and meaning to what I do as a clinician, and that's been a great journey as well. And that's the journey that I met your wife at during the school there that I went to.
Yeah, and that's there's a lot there, and definitely I I can understand, because I'm in through the VA system right now. I've gone down the pharmaceutical route because that was all I. At some point, it's just like, um, you're going from the place I was in. You're kind of going there like, hey, I need help. I don't know what's wrong. I'm trusting you to give me whatever I need to do to get fixed. And then that's just it's like a triage, right? They're addressing all the symptoms on a very high level, and that's one of the big differences I've noticed since applying TCM, or traditional Chinese medicine, to my life, as opposed to, and that's like I tell people, there's room for both, right? When I was in Korea, that was the first time I saw it. I went to a hospital. Um, I was, I mean, it's probably TMI, but I had some medical issues. I went to Korea, or they sent me off base, and I went and I got seen like Western medicine wise, but on the other side of the hospital, they had like herbs and traditional Chinese medicine, like, and like acupuncture and all this stuff. And that was the first time I seen that. And I still didn't understand the concept of it, right? Because in my mind, I was like, the only things that I knew about acupuncture was what I saw in all the kung fu films when I
Yeah,
grew up, when
yeah,
Bruce Lee, and I was always fascinated by it, but I just didn't know. And anytime it was ever addressed by anybody here in America, it was just like, oh, that stuff doesn't work, or that's you know, it was just always kind of thrown off to the side. And that still kind of exists today, unfortunately, because some of the whole health professionals, because I'm in the road in that system that I've spoken with, there's still that mindset where it's just like us versus them. And when they've told me that they try to collaborate with um, people on the other side of the hospital, or if you will, the western side of it, there's like a pushback, or they don't want to share information, which is strange to me, because it's like, I thought it was about the patient. They're making it about you, and like you're kind of in these tribes. And I understand there's a human nature aspect to it, but at the same time, like, you need to, at the end of the day, right? You're military, right? You have to be professional about it. We may not get along, we might not see eye to eye, but at the same time, if this stuff is going to work and it's been proven to work, obviously the VAs, they did a 10-year study on it.
yeah,
They there it has I'm pretty sure they have the research to back that up. And the first time I was actually kind of introduced to Chinese medicine was on a deployment. I was sleeping on a worn mattress. I mean, thankfully I was able to be sleeping on a mattress, right?
yeah,
And I'm not complaining by any means, but that thing was worn in, and I couldn't. One day I got up and I couldn't get out of bed. I was just, my back was seized up. I went to um dang, I forgot, sick call. And I was like, I just need something to. I was just thinking they're gonna give me Motrin, and they did give me Motrin. But the guy asked me like, "Hey, um, would you be interested in?" I don't know what he called it at the time, but he said, I want to say he said acupuncture. I don't think it was called battlefield at that time, but
yeah. No.
he put
Oh, okay, gotcha.
yeah, he put the gold studs in my ears, the
Right.
ASP needles,
Yeah,
um, and I was open to it, and I got it, and that was the first time I was introduced to it, right? And
yeah,
of course, people on base were giving, like, like, were looking at me like that, thinking I was cool, because I had gold studs in my ears, not knowing, and they're like ignorant to what it was. I mean, to a certain extent, but at the same time, that kind of started my journey and my interest into it. Um, Fast forward, like, I've been for what, like 5 years. We went to like a community alpha group on in Boston. Um, and this was like kind of my journey, right? I was taking every psych med because I'm just trusting, right? And I'm trying not to like not knock Western medicine, because the place I was in, I was like, I don't know what's going on. I need you to fix me. And if you tell me what to take, I'm gonna take it, right? Because I need to figure what's going on with me, right? And I didn't understand it much for myself at that time. And then, like to your point, right? Sometimes, even though the herbs are not as potent as some of the pharmaceuticals and concentrated, uh, Sandy says is often like sometimes you have to take away before adding, right? So
Yeah.
it's probably good that herbs are subtle, right? Because you kind of can pick apart and really understand what the root cause is. Because if you add something that's too potent, yeah, I may address one, but it's going to bring up all these other things, right? Because your body's going to
Yeah.
um, attack it because it's a foreign entity or a foreign substance, and all these other markers are going to start popping up. But I say that to say this, like both can exist in both different worlds, and it's just like trying to uh re educate and kind of understand like, hey, it's about the patient. It's not about you, it's not about your degrees or anything like that. But there's like we do have a epidemic of proportion or for like mental health, physical health, and that's a lot of things, right? We can get into um convenience, the idea of convenience. Like you're talking about living in the woods, right, and trying to figure out how to survive. People aren't even shopping for their food anymore. They have, you could order it online. You just go pick it up at the curbside, and they just put it in your car. That we've come a long way from
Yeah.
hunting for our food and foraging. And to each their own, right? I understand there are people with uh, that have handicaps or mental like or handicaps on certain levels, and they can't really shop for the. So there's a convenience for that. But at the same time, it's like we're losing our sight of who we are as humans, and there has to be some type of balance to that, because like back to your point, like was there, and I know I'm saying a lot and kind of jumping around, but was there like something that happened, or just like a some type of epiphany? It was like, I really want to figure out how to use more natural, uh for lack of a better word, more natural options for myself. And like, because it's strange how we've gone from like the pendulum swings both ways, right? Like at one time there was like, shaman and medicine men and women in tribes, and they used the earth, right? They knew nature in a way that we don't understand now, or at least most of us don't understand now. And we're kind of like, and most pharmaceuticals are brought like from natural herbs, and they're just concentrated and synthesized, from the rainforest to just our backyard and all these things, right? But we've lost that way, and it seems to be swinging back the other way, because it seems like, at least for the most part, most of society's kind of hit that top of the pinnacle, and it's starting to swing back the other way. But was there something for you that just kind of back in the 80s that was just like, I want to figure this out for myself? Like, was it just like intuition, or was there like an event, or there's something
Yeah,
that kind of put you on
so a
that
few
path?
things for sure. Yeah, and I think because a lot of people come into herbal medicine from a sickness. Honestly, I get a lot of students that come in because they have something where they got kicked around from doctor to doctor for 5 or 10 years, and nothing happened. And there's still and there's a lot of limitations in the paradigm of pharmaceutical medicine, and so they slip through all those cracks, and then they come to me and we fix it, or we get them at least on their way. I have a really high success rate with this type of thing. And the next thing I know, they're like, this has been life changing for me, and I want to learn this. So anyway, a lot of people come in that way. I did not, but a lot of people do. I agree with you too from the standpoint of us being separated from nature and earth. And I always say there are several different levels to looking at medicine and how it hits us. And so when you mentioned, for instance, shamanistic rituals and that type of thing, there's an outer level. I think there's a spiritual level that's related to the earth, that's related to our body, on what would be, for lack of a better term, the spirit. Now, when you look at TCM, they have several different spirits, which is really cool. But for us, from a Western perspective, we could just say, hey, in general. And so an example of that would be like a lot of the different psychological issues that are going on. when I was living, I spent a short period of time living and working with a shaman in the rainforest in also in Nicaragua, in eastern Nicaragua, and he asked me at one point. He said, "Why do I hear all the time about people having they have like there's like you have a lot of depression and people with suicide, and there's a real big problem with that." And so we kind of talked about it a little bit with my limited Spanish. And he said, to me, that's a spiritual problem. There's a lack of connection to where they come from and where the earth is, and that's really more spiritual. And so we would use herbs that were more based on being able to pull them back in this way that there may not be any medical correlation from a Western pharmaceutical reductionist perspective. You might not be able to identify any single active constituent in that plant that changes how you think per se. You might not be able to, you might, but it doesn't matter because this is really a spiritual journey here that we're working with. And so we're even finding that now in the West. We're finding it with, microdosing of some of the psilocybin and some of the different, basically nootropic and psychotropic medicines as well. So that is one thing I think that needs to be acknowledged as well. For me personally, I grew up somehow kind of close in a very plant literate family. I always tell a story. I remember being 4 or 5 years old. One of my first memories. We gardened all our own food. I was born in outside of Spokane. It's kind of a rural area, and then we moved to Colorado when I was 11. So I consider myself a Colorado native, quote unquote. But because I grew up there, this is the memory I really remember most. But I remember being 4 or 5, and we grew all our own food. We canned all our own food. We lived on what we can in the winter. A lot of times we didn't. We didn't make a lot of money. And so, but we had some land, and both my mother and father were farmers. And so I remember my mother explaining to me at an early age, that the plants that she talked to did better than the ones that she didn't. And I remember talking to plants when I was 5 years old all the time, so there was already a connection there. I've also been very much into martial arts since a very young age. And I remember getting a book from the library. I think it was called Kung Fu and it was like an introduction to a lot of stuff. And in the back, they had this whole Qigong thing. And they had these pictures from like demonstrations in China, like in the 60s, of these Qigong masters that were like lying on on like 10-inch nail spike bed and holding, cinder blocks and having a cinder block smashed and standing up and having no marks on their back and stuff. And I was just like, I was entranced with that kind of thing. And they had all these different Qigong exercises. So I remember, even though I was into, I guess what you would say more, the first martial art I kind of got into was close enough I could bike to and I could afford with my paper route money, was kind of a Korean, karate type martial art. And since then I've done a lot of many, many other things and gone many different ways. But at the time, that was sort of that. And then I would practice all these Qigong. So my point is, whatever that 40 years later or 50 years later, however long it was, to come back around to traditional Chinese medicine and be working in the school, in the clinic, and having patients that I was working with, and to start to understand the movement of qi and saying, wow, this stuff. And when I was in special forces, in selection and in the Q course, qigong, I think, kept me from being injured, kept me from dropping out, physically. I was always, even if I only had 4 hours of sleep, 3 hours of sleep, whatever, first thing I do when I wake up, bunk bed, or in a barracks bed, for lack of a better word, we'll call it a bed, just lying there, and it'd be the first thing I would do would just be like to breathe, and just, it didn't matter if I only had like a minute, it would just be a minute of breath work before I'd get out of bed, or whatever. If I had a moment to be able to do something, a little bit of qigong, where nobody would see me, just a standing meditation exercise. So by the time I got to TCM, I'm with all these other students. So I think for the first time in their life, they'd ever really considered Qi Gong, and the work of Gong meaning work and Qi meaning Qi, which is really, in my opinion, the the concept of the molecular level of life. And that's different for trees, that's different for humans, it's different for animals, it's different for the earth, but it's the same in the sense that it's still that molecular component of life. What is life? What is that? What actually gives us life? If there's a dead body versus a live body, you cut a dead body, it will not repair. You cut a live body, and regardless of, for your situation, your body will try to heal itself. It will try to live. And so that's what I think of as qi when I think of it. And so the movement or the flow of that qi is actually an exercise. It's actually something you can practice and you can get better at. So by the time I was working with that in Chinese medicine, I'd been like 30 or 40 years of my life. I'd already been familiar with it and working with it in my own body. So it made it very easy to translate that over. So that's another aspect of it, I think, even though I'm not I would say, I'm probably more of a tradition. I would say from an Asian perspective, they say, in Chinese medicine in Asia, herbs are 80% and needles are 20%. In America, herbs are 80%, or I'm sorry, needles are 80% and herbs are 20%. And that's primarily probably a big part of that is because of the fact that you can't you can't pay for herbs with insurance. Needles you can insure and get health insurance to pay for, but not herbs. I don't care about insurance. I don't care about any of that. So for me and for my tradition is herbs anyway. So but even with that, it's like still understanding that from a needle perspective and actually feeling it and moving the chi with using the needles. And then boom, all of a sudden, wow, I can see how herbs in this whole paradigm can work then too. That's incredible. That's a whole nother layer of thinking. And so I agree with you. The patient is always first, right? And we've lost track of that in many places because of the political influence of pharmaceutical medicine that started literally in the 1910s with what was called the Flexner reports that then changed medical education completely in the United States. And people don't understand this. So there was a 70 or 80-year smokescreen over actual healing and working with herbal medicine and during that time pharmaceutical medicine was the only way to heal, the only way to work with any kind of anything, and anything other than that was deemed as chicanery. It was deemed as somebody's just it's a scam. It's just what do you call it? Snake oil. And that's completely false. And so you've mentioned that it's coming back around, and it is, and it's money related. The nutraceutical industry is a billions of dollar of year industry now. So there's so much money in it. And pharmaceutical, believe me, there's a lot of pharmaceutical investments in the nutraceutical market for sure. There's always new stuff coming out. And so it's the cat's out of the bag, right? And this happened in 1995 with Day Act, and it's happened and it's continued to happen now. Even the FDA and GMP, what are called good manufacturing practice rules. Everything that's happened since at least since 1995, going forward in our own political and our own system of legislation has changed that landscape considerably from when I started. And you had to be looking over your shoulder all the time because you didn't know, if somebody was going to report you for practicing medicine without a license or whatever. So it's a whole different environment. And because of that, I think regardless of well, assuming that we don't have a huge collapse, or something happens, but if we continue the way we're going, I think there's no question we're going to continue to see herbal medicine become a more integrated part of our medicine. And I'm all for that. I used to be kind of like anti-pharma, which was ironic because I had to, learn and use pharma as a medic, of course. But I kind of went through a phase where I was just like anti-pharma for a while. It's like, no, that doesn't answer the question either. You've
Yeah.
got to be able to use both and you've got to be able to work with both. And so I see myself more as a translator between, the worlds of TCM and Western herbalism and Western medicine. How can I translate? And this works. I mean, because I work with doctors all the time who are very much into it. They don't have the ego. They want to help the patient. They just want to see somebody get better. And they realize that's why I came into medicine in the first place. I want to help people. And it doesn't matter if I'm using herbs or I'm using functional medicine and nutrition and I'm using lifestyle and I'm using pharmaceuticals when I need to and whatever. So I think in the end, to be optimistic about it, while a lot of other things may be falling apart, that I think is something better, assuming that we continue to have the multi-billion-dollar market that we do with nutraceutical medicine.
Right. That's the first time I've heard nutraceutical medicine, but it always has to, there's always a fancy word to kind of
Yeah,
recapture that idea, right? So having said that, you brought up something about like losing your ways spiritually, right? In the military, used to talk about 5 pillars or 4 pillars. It was like social, like to combat, like so it was like social, physical, but one of them was, I don't remember all of them right now, but one of them was spiritual. And that at that point in time when I heard that, I I I understood it, but I really didn't understand it. You can understand like a concept of it, but having said that, fast forward, and I agree with you, right? There was a part with me, I was like anti-pharmaceutical, and then I started to realize very quickly, fortunately for me, was like, yeah, there are good and bad parts to everything, right? There's good and bad, and some people exploit something good for their negative use, and vice versa, right? Or it's just like lack of training, lack of understanding. But
yeah,
at the same time, I understood like at the place I was, I needed to figure out like to kind of stabilize me. Not to say that I mean stabilize, at least get me back to homeostasis, right? To under like back to balance, and so I can kind of start to figure out what's going on for me internally and start to figure that stuff out. But having said all that, I learned quickly right afterwards is like, no, there was a place for that. Like, if you break your arm, I want it fixed right away, right? Yeah, there are natural ways to do that, but we could also use technology to, or Western medicine advances that we've had to try to remedy that a little bit quicker, right? And then I'll cap that off on the end, and which I have when I fractured my collarbone, my wrist, all these things. I've used Chinese medicine to expedite that the healing, right? Or not so take me out of that trauma response or that fight or flight, because your nervous system is shocked. I remember one time, I think I ripped my arm apart. That sounds more. I split it open, right? It was, and then I got stitches, but then I couldn't eat for a couple of days, and I just felt like crap and all these things, right? And what it was, I went to go see Guerrero. I want to go see Guerrero, and he reset my, because I ask all these questions, right? Because I also understand like you could go to Joe Dispenza, you talk about the visualization of healing and all these things, right? And so I started to practice all those things. But what I noticed after he gave me treatment was my appetite, because I couldn't have an appetite. Like I would drink water and I would like throw it up. Long story short, probably too late. My body was like in this like I was still like in this what's the word? It's
State of
not
shock.
sympathetic. Yeah, yeah, it was still in a state of shock. And so after he gave me treatment, he like reset that. I kind of see like a accessing the human body electrical panel, and then kind of like flipping switches or whatever, or just using the natural
Mhm.
through acupuncture. And right after that, my appetite started to come back. I started eating crackers and stuff like that. But that's to my point, right? You could use both of them. And with that, have you? And I think you have. Have you gone down the path of like, I mean, it's kind of like a new terminology to it, but like quantum biology, like
Yeah.
where,
When quantum
right?
healing came out, that book came out, I was really into it. Wait, and that was a long time ago, a couple
Hmm.
decades ago, but I remember getting into that idea then. But yeah, we can absolutely enhance. You mentioned something about expediting healing, and I think that's really where herbs can help a lot. And of course, Dr. G is great. He's awesome, man. And so he saw whatever needed to happen, and he probably, I'm assuming, worked with needles as well. And
Yeah.
for those who don't know, Dr. Guerrero was one of our instructors. He was one of our faculty at the school that we studied at in San Antonio. I don't think he's still there anymore, but he was for a long time. He's a director even for a while, and he's just a wonderful instructor and an amazing healer too. But so I think that so my own story, for instance, on a broken bone, I broke my thumb. This is, if you buy my book, Herbal Medic, you can get that out on Amazon or whatever. It was a bestseller for story publishing for the last 3 years, or one of their top three bestsellers. And so it's a well-read book. And in the beginning, I talk about this story of how I got to North Carolina. So I mentioned the 300F1 course, the first 8 months of the of the medic, 18 Delta course in Special Forces was in San Antonio back then. Then you ship down to North Carolina and finish that up in Goat Lab, which is incredibly stressful. It's the hardest course I've ever done in my life. It was amazing. It was both amazing and horrible at the same time. As you can imagine, we work with goats there, or did at the time. And the blood is real, and you're not allowed to use the word goat. It's your patients, and you're highly sleep deprived, and you're working on everything from gunshot wounds and trauma, and doing kind of meatball surgery and debridements and amputations, all the way to constant trauma, ABC trauma, and then long-term care too, long-term patient cares too. So you got all that going on, and you're up all night writing stuff and researching and Merck manual stuff all night, and you're working all day, and you're being tested all the time. Well, prior to that, I had about a week in between getting from San Antonio down there, and I had a buddy who was already down there, was an SF in San Antonio. Or I'm sorry, in Fort Bragg, and he was into mountain biking. He's like, hey, and I was too. And of course, I had a crappy little Diamondback back then. This was in 1980, this was 1990 maybe, or 1991. And he's like, hey, let's do, some mountain biking. So we went on trails there. Being from Colorado and being used to rocks and everything, it was all sand. And I went over this one jump and landed in the sand, and I just went straight out, fallen outstretched hand injury. And and I heard the pop. And it was, and so basically an avulsion fracture of my left thumb. It just, pulled a piece of the bone, the tendon stretches and pulls a piece of bone right off the thumb. Right. And
Ah,
I didn't, I was in denial, at first. It's like, I didn't really hear that. I'm fine. I'll be okay. And then I went back, and at Go Lab, we'd already done in processing. So I knew we had access to our own x-ray machines, our own microscopy and everything there, right? It's all its own little world in there. So I went and just x-rayed my own hand. And sure enough, I mean, it was just like, you could tell bigger than hell. You could see the bone pulled away. And so then I was like, well, this is real. So let me go up to the real, to the hospital. So I went to the, Fort Bragg hospital and went in there, and they did the same thing, radiology and all that. And then the doc's like, hey, yeah, you got an avulsion fracture, no doubt about that. He's like, but, and it's big. And the only way to fix this really is with an open reduction, internal fixation. We're going to have to pin it. There's no way it'll heal any other way. And I was like, and he's like, no problem. I'll sign off on it. You'll get a medical recycle. And my goal was, so I had a 3-year-old son at the time, and in Colorado, that I hadn't seen for almost a year. And I felt like a piece of crap of a dad. And I was like, I am not spending 1 minute longer away from my son than I have to, so I'm not taking a freaking recycle. I'm either making it through this in one shot or not, or I'm out. And the thing was, they give you one recycle in, well, depending, I mean, like a medical reason, or if they believed you could make it, they might, you'd get counseled, and then you could get a recycle. Not everybody did, but they give you one recycle in the 300F1, and they give you one recycle in Go Lab, was usually the way it went, right? So you'd get people that would recycle a couple times and end up washing out anyway, and then go down the line, they'd be an Echo, Commo, or they'd be Engineer, or they'd be Bravo. Kind of everybody land at the bottom of the pile of the Bravos. We'd make jokes about that, but it's being the easiest of the four specialties and special forces team. But anyway, my point was that we started with 83 in San Antonio, and we ended with 13 of the originals, right? And I was one of those 13. Well, what got me through that was herbs. So I told the doc, I'm not taking a recycle, and he cussed me out. And he's like, I said, let me just just put a cast on it, doc, and I'll take care of the rest. And he's like, you're an idiot. You're going to flunk. You're going to never have use of that thumb again. You're never going to have full grip strength again. Get the fuck out of my office. And if I see you in here, you're getting an Article 15 for disobeying a direct order.
whoa.
So I was like, okay, I'm out. And I stopped and got the cast on, got back to barracks, got the cast off, went to town. And I knew, because I'd been already in town, I'd been in town there about a week. And I knew there was like this kind of a new age shop back then. It wasn't a real herb shop, but I knew they had herbs there. And I knew some of the herbs. At that point, I maybe had a materia medica of, herbs that I knew of, maybe only like 20 herbs, right? I mean, I probably work with 350 or 400 herbs all the time here, but at that back then, I knew like maybe 20 herbs. And I knew 2 of them really well were horsetail and comfrey. And I knew they had them there, because when I went there, I looked through all their herbs, of course. So I went back there and I got a pound of each of those 2 herbs, and I came back to the barracks. God, when I think about it, I was just like, that was a lot of balls, because it's like I put everything and hid it underneath my locker, because I was scared to death they were going to think I had pot, I had weed.
Oh yeah.
And I thought any instructor saw this, they were going to think immediately weed. And even if it wasn't, they probably wouldn't even test. They probably just kick your ass out. They, maybe make you do a urine test, and if positive or negative, and kick you out. Not going to believe you. It's just how it was. It's like any chance they could to kick you out, they would. Was my experience anyway. So anyway, I made little baggies of this, and I took 4x4 gauze, because we had tons of medical supplies, and I put them in the baggies, and I just made these poultices. So I just get them wet, and I just put it on there. And I don't even think I'd really read much about that. I just kind of instinctively like, let's just get the herb into this thumb. And I made these, these baggies. And so I keep them in my cargo pocket, and about every 3 or 4 hours, I go in, I take off the old one, and I'd wrap it up with like an ace wrap, and I put the new one on there. So I had this ace wrap on my thumb the whole time. And I had like, and it would always have like wet spots in it, The instructors kind of looked the other way. We had to divide the class in half, and I lucked out. The half I got had microscopy for like the first 4 weeks instead of trauma. So the one half, because they didn't have enough room for everybody to have trauma. So half the class got trauma, half the class got microscopy. So for 4 weeks, I was able to basically just do that and kind of do my own physical therapy. And And then by the time emergency trauma came around, and it's heavy duty trauma, man, you're doing a cricothyroidotomy on a goat every single freaking day. It means you gotta be able to reach that trachea, pop that trachea up, and pop up, and get your airway into there, because they're putting gloves down their nose. I mean, they really have no airway, literally no airway, and they're gonna have a bleeding problem. They're gonna have circulation. They're gonna have a breathing. Sorry. So it's going to be an ABC for you no matter what. And it might be different stuff here and there, but there's no airway. And man, I know it's my non-cutting hand that I have to grab that trachea with that I broke, my left hand, because I'm right-handed. But man, my thumb would just ache for, like, sometimes for hours afterwards. But I just keep that poultice on there. And I know they knew, because I had to fill out a report about it. I know they knew it. They knew I needed an ORIF, but the instructor was just like, let's just wait and see him quit, and I didn't.
Yeah.
I made it through and I passed all my tests. And it was hard work, but and at that point in my head, it was like, herbs work.
Yeah.
They work incredibly. And so now I can tell you, yeah, I know the inflammatory cycle that happens on energy and injury. And I know the Western explanation for that, with hydrostatic pressure on one side and osmotic on the other, and how we can increase that, and the lymph capillaries in there too, how we can increase that. So we're not trying to reduce inflammation. We're not giving NSAIDs and that kind of crap. We're actually increasing the speed of that inflammation to work through, so we can clean that area out so it can heal faster. We can get proliferation faster too for the next stage of healing. And it works, approaching it from the Western standpoint like that, it all fits and it all works. And I can point to 100 herbs at least that we could use for different processes and parts of that process. And it's very effective. So why wouldn't we use it,
Hmm. That's one thing that, I mean, that's fascinating to hear. And it also, I was thinking about because all the injuries that I've had since mountain biking, right? Um, I've learned from each of them different things, both mentally and physically. And one of the things I learned, and it sounds like you were saying, well, one, like TCM works. Two, and now I visualize it because I'll ask Sandy or Dr. Guerrero, like when I feel like a needle go in, I'll feel like a sensation, let's say in my foot or whatever. And they're like, oh yeah, that's the whatever meridian. So it's like the visualization of, and then once I started to understand, like it's trying to move stagnation. So like what people will see as inflammation, it's just like I kind of visualize it as uh, a pipe, right, that's being clogged. So it's like if we're trying to move that stagnation, we're trying to get that bad blood out, which is liquid, and then get it moving and get the body's like natural healing process, and try to push all that bad stuff on, as opposed to just keeping it there. And then the second part that I caught it. I mean, I don't know if it's my term. Maybe I heard it, but I like to call it like functional therapy, I guess. And that's um, so like when I recently when I've just what did I break? It's pretty bad. You can't remember what you broke last. Um, I think it was my wrist. But one of the things, as soon as I got the cast off, I was using this I had it around here, but it's got some bands and you can like pull it just to get the movement, the blood flowing, kind of moving a little bit. But then I picked up my bow and like pulling on it, right? A little bit, see how much I could pull. I started to do things that I would normally do,
Yeah.
uh to, as opposed to just the stupid I don't want to say stupid. The exercises they give you, they're just like do this and do that, and it's just like no, like, and then it's another thing, like I don't take any pain meds. It's because I feel like the pain is there to let you know how far you could go or not go, right? And listen to it. If you take pain meds, it numbs that, and you don't know, and you could get re-injured because you don't understand what your limitations are.
Right.
So those are kind of all the things I kind of picked up, and I kind of related into, or it's like parallel to my injuries that I've had. And it's not just one thing, it's a lot of different things. It's also like uh not just taking something and not understanding like what it's going to do to you, because if you can visualize the healing process in that, or believe in it, right, like that, there's a something that happens right in the mind when you know that something's going to work, as opposed to like this ain't going to work, this ain't going to work, because it kind of puts your body in that um and that stressful state, and it doesn't compromises your immune system, and it doesn't allow your body to properly heal, as opposed to this is going to work. And it's not like a false um, like trying to just sugarcoat something just to believe it just for the fact of it. No, it's like truly understanding like what it's doing, and then also doing all the things like eating the right foods and stuff, the nourishing foods to try to help yourself. Do I do this all the time? No, but I try to like bone broth and stuff like that, things that are actually going to help you, herbs. I'm better about it when I'm really injured as opposed to, I don't know, if I have like a headache or something, of taking my herbs.
Yeah.
But those are all things that we can do to participate in our healing, as opposed to the convenience that I kind of alluded to earlier of like, just give me a pill. You know, you give me a pill, it's going to work. I'm going to go about my day. I'm going to do all these things. I'm going to, watch horror movies and put my body in this stressful state, and it's not going to properly heal, or it's going to take longer to heal, as opposed to another thing I noticed too, like when I broke my hand, I couldn't ride. And when I first broke my hand, that's when I realized, like, because I put all my eggs in the basket of like mountain biking, right? It was like almost like a finding a religion, right? To a certain extent. And it was just like, this is like, because it brought me, it was like another step, another rung to take me out of where I was, right? It gave me that feel to, like, I could be good at something again. It kind of reminded me, gave me the vibes of when I play football, and I got that adrenaline rush and all these things, right?
Yeah.
And it was a sport, it was outdoors, and then I started to appreciate nature more. But when I broke my hand, I was so pissed off, like, at myself for allowing something to, like, just putting all my eggs in one basket. When like, what if I can't ride anymore? What am I gonna do? like am I just gonna use this one thing? And I kind of came up with this term in my head, like, don't be one dimensional, find other things that bring you joy. Because when you can't do that thing no more, due to old age or injury or whatever, like, then what are you gonna do? You're just gonna fall apart and just, like, just suck all day, But so I started, like, archery and all these different things. But when I broke my hand, I was like, there's a I remember hearing about a study, and I can't. You could probably cite it better than I can, but I talk about this a lot, and I always want to go and look up that research. But there was a study, and they had two patients, or patients in general, and they had same injuries, and they put some of these patients by windows with uh, trees, nature outside, and the other ones just in a room with no windows. And the patients that had access to nature visually healed faster than the ones that didn't.
Oh yeah.
So I took that, and then kind of intuitively, right? I started to go on trail walks with Lotus and stuff like that, and I think that facilitated my healing as well. It's that forward movement. Andrew Huberman talks about it as well.
Yeah.
But it's like, all these, if you could do all these things and really participate in your healing, you're gonna be that heal that much quicker and heal that much better, in my opinion. That's from my experience. Those are the things I've learned from all the injuries that I've had, in the past 5 years.
Yeah. That was also really interesting was the fact that if you believe, you can heal. And there's a really good book that came out a long time ago called The Biology of Belief, I think it's called, I think. And it's written by an MD that was, or is a PhD. I may be getting a couple of books mixed up, but they kind of came about at the same time. But basically, it gets into the concept of epigenetics and
Mm,
the ability of our cells to change based on what we believe and how we feel. And in that, for instance, one of the first things that I remember I want to say I got it on audiobook, so it's back in the early 2000s or mid 2000s. And it was, he was talking about how people consider the brain of the cell, for instance, to be the nucleus, but it's really not. It's really not. It's really that he felt it's really the membrane of the cell. So all the information coming in and out actually of that cell is what tells the cell what to do. And he compared it to the human body, all the information coming in and out. So if you're talking about nature, where you're talking about your environment, you're talking about, living in a household where everybody's screaming and fighting versus where people are getting along and there's tranquility and there's some balance and harmony. All of those things are going to affect our body in many ways. And you can even point it down to the cellular epigenetics that will happen as we work with that, in my opinion. It was either this or another one that I heard where this was a PhD that apparently had like a high school project that eventually, like 6 or 7 years later, he got a Nobel Peace Prize for it. So he was like a genius at a very early age. And I don't know if it was this project or part of this that had to do with different waveforms that we emit when we have certain emotions that, and I don't know, this it sounded like it should have been classified information, but it was weaponry information that he said was used back in Desert Storm, like back in Kuwait.
Mm,
Desert Storm, right? Was it? Yeah, Desert Shield, Desert Storm. I was in Q course when Desert Shield happened, I think, and then that became Desert Storm, right? But anyway, Kuwait, the war in Kuwait, long before before the Afghanistan and Iraq war. Um, which wasn't really a war. It was, I had guys, there were guys over there that I knew later. They were on teams, medics especially, they were on Special Forces medics teams that called it a POW collection exercise. And it was just, there was people that had no will at all to fight. Well, this guy was saying he was on a research team that developed this for the DoD that had these ability to take like emotion, like waveforms that we would create with something like depression, and there would be a specific waveform they would map to this. And then they figured out how to fly, like put that and project it amplify it off of drones. And he said they were just like bombarding troops with these waveforms of depression and fatigue, and you're just, wanting to give up, just like futility. And he said that was, in his little thing, he was saying, you want to know why people were surrendering? This is why, not, because of the other. It's like, well, I don't know if it's true or not, but I remember thinking it's really fascinating, and I don't doubt at all, because as well as I do, probably in a military situation, especially, that one bad personality, one bad attitude can destroy an entire team. And conversely, one good attitude can make everything happen. You just have one person, that's all it takes, and out of 12 guys on a team that's just, just got a problem with everything, and this isn't going to work, and it's just like an infection that starts to grow.
mhm,
So we do that, right? And the same thing is true internally with healing, and our external environment is absolutely tied into that. How you feel, how people are supporting you or not supporting you, all of that. It's the human organism. It's not just a series of chemicals that you can change with a pharmaceutical. That is not what our bodies are. And I think people are finally waking up to that and realizing that. And it's more than just saying stress. Everything used to
mhm,
be, well, it's just stress. And that there's a way more involved in this. But if it can't be quantified under a microscope, it doesn't exist. Well, the point is that we are using tools that we created to define the reality that we understood to make the tools in the first place. And that's the problem. When you have that problem, you can't actually see outside of your own little tunnel. And so it takes other paradigms like TCM or like Ayurveda or whatever to be able to see part of the paradigm or part of the big problem, the big picture, let's say it that way, from many different aspects, right? It's like the five blind men who are describing an elephant by what they feel, right? So this is where we're at as a species, and we need everything we can get, I think, to be able to proceed and to grow and to evolve.
yeah, and I know what you're talking about. I've talked about that before, and I think that was discovered by a three-letter agency. I'll just say that. I think in the '60s, through an antenna called like HARP, where they were able to manipulate a population based off of the frequencies. So the lower frequencies would create a lot of negative feelings, right? More agitation. Higher frequencies were euphoria, sense of euphoria. So that technology was probably used in that. That's the first time I've heard about it in Invasion, but with everything I kind of uncovered now, especially as post retirement and stuff like that, and just kind of stuff like just connecting all the dots, if you will. It doesn't surprise me, right? But at the same time, I mean, I don't know if it's true or not, but it doesn't surprise me, especially that everything is kind of uncovered now. Having said that, going to kind of back, have you do you know about Masaru Emoto's research at all with water and
Yes,
the studies
right.
he did with
Putting waves
water?
through water and then using, yeah, yeah, yeah. That's pretty famous.
Yes, cymatics, all those things, right? And then like, so I've talked about this before. I mean, that attitude, right, will infect, like that negative attitude, that positive attitude will affect. And I've also kind of used it, like if you're walked into a room where somebody's real negative, you just kind of feel gross and stuff when you leave. And that's that transformation that happens, transmutation transformation that happens on a cellular level by that energy that's being emitted by that person, that frequency that person's putting out. And it sounds like hocus pocus stuff. Probably people listening like, "Oh, I'm done." But no, if you actually do like a little bit of research, especially in the age of information and how fast it moves, and you
Yeah.
can access it right now. But just people are just, it's crazy how much more lazier people have gotten And I'm included with that. I'll throw myself in there. You ask somebody like a question, like you could just Google it, or you could just search it up and see if somebody's full of shit or not. But if
Yeah.
you just do a little bit of research, you could find like this information. Masuri Moto, it's a study of water and how it changes. There were just do a real quick one, but they put like as the water is freezing, they put a negative intent. So going back to your plants, talking to plants, the positive music. They put a jealousy into the water and see how it freezes, like how it forms.
Yeah.
Long story short, the positive emotions would uh, form in this beautiful geometric pattern, and the negative emotions were like chaotic and really like sporadic and gross looking comparatively. And we are primarily water, so we kind of just take that on the whole and go do your own research. You'll see what we're talking about. But all those things are relative to the human experience, the human consciousness, and thoughts, and all these things can affect us negatively or positively. So,
Yeah. I mean, and we were there's so much money in the defense industry, and I remember looking at National Geographic. This is at least maybe even 2 decades ago, but certainly at least 1 decade ago, when they were showing camouflage patterns. They had all these camouflage patterns, and not just camouflage patterns, but um, camouflage and structural integrity of things like filaments that were being borrowed from insects and some animals like reptiles and even and amphibians. They were able to like change their, like a chameleon, for instance, or spider web. And so all the stuff was in this National Geographic, and there were pictures of like there's a picture of a guy wearing one of these uniforms, and he's standing like in a brick wall with that's only like waist high, and then like a tree behind him. I mean, you could find the National Geographic. I can't remember exactly, but it's like he's got like the brick wall is, his uniform is changing to the pattern of the brick wall on the bottom and to like the tree behind him on the top. And I just remember the guy that was being interviewed had worked for DARPA or something for who knows how long. He's like, this is just the stuff we're allowed to tell you.
yeah.
Think about what we actually really are doing. And when you can imagine that this is the stuff we're telling you. And it was incredible, like, spider web stuff for or spider strands that were something like three or maybe more than that times the tensile strength of steel, cables.
Mhm.
It's pretty incredible stuff.
Yeah, and yeah, and that's the thing too, right? Is that whatever they're showing you is just like they probably had the technology for like 20, 30 years already, and they're just allowing you to release it. So, yeah, there's all kinds of um, things that we don't know about, but we also it's I think Mark Twain said it is like truth is stranger than fiction. I think Hunter S. Thompson's had something similar to say that, but it's true. The truth like is stranger than fiction.
Yeah.
Like the things that we don't understand or know, um, and we're kind of being taught how to think as opposed to what to or how to think. Is there's definitely a big difference with that. Um, but I'm glad because sometimes I talk about some of these ideas and these thought processes, and I have to kind of like check myself. I'm like, am I reading this right? Am I like just because I mean it's fun to talk about one, but at the same time, like, is there truth to it? Especially with AI and everything else nowadays, it's hard to understand what is real and what isn't. Like, I don't know if you've seen some of these videos that they have of famous people, and it's AI generated, and they're saying these things, but it's not really them. But it looks real, and you could tell it's a little off. But like, I'd say like in 6 months, like that technology is going to evolve, and it's going to be even crazier. So, um,
Yeah,
truth
like
is definitely stranger than
there's a
fiction.
there's a famous meme that I love or something that goes something to the effect of it's a quote, in quotation marks, and it says, don't believe everything that you read on an internet meme, and then it's attributed to Abraham Lincoln.
I saw something the other day. It was like the thumbnail on a YouTube, and it says atheists find this difficult to believe. And I said something like, I looked at Sandy, I was like, atheist reading this is probably like, I don't believe it. But it's just crazy. Like what we think we understand about our world, and then like the deeper you dive, and it's not just in one subject. Kind of going back to kind of bring us back on track earlier, like. And I think a lot of people, especially in professional medical fields and like neuroscience and neurophysiologists and all these different things, are finally starting to they everyone, even like astrophysicists, Albert Einstein and Nikola Tesla, have they've all hit a point where there has to be something bigger at play here. You know what I mean? And it's if you could throw all these data points, and I talked about this often too, is on the wall, right? So like quantum biology, herbs, nature, science, Masudo Emoto and water and like protons, photons, are like, and but like find all the endpoints of them and connect them all. It will help answer the questions. I guess my point is like people get kind of sucked into their specialty and don't talk to other specialties to try to understand where they're like having issues understanding uh what the bigger answer is, what the bigger picture is to connect all these different understandings of the human body or the earth or vibrations, frequencies, and stuff like that. Because unfortunately, we kind of get uh, for a long time, people were ostracized for believing these, fringe ideas, right? But there is truth in that. I mean, go back to um, you were talking about shaman in Nicaragua, how he has this understanding of nature that most people do not, right? It's because he's been in it, he's been immersed in it, and the longer I spend in it, there's things that I just walk into nature have come to me intuitively, only to have, and then to share that with somebody, and then they send me something like, "Hey, remember that thing you told me about?" And it was just, it sounds hokey pokey or whatever, but and I feel strange saying it because coming from the mindset of where I was to now, 10 years ago, I would have been like, if I would have heard me saying it, I was like, man, what the fuck are you smoking? Like you sound like crazy. But um, speaking of negative energy, like if you're like in this depressed state, I kind of visualized there was like these two trees, right? And visually, I just kind of felt all this funk that I had, and through one of them, I was just pushing like this. I visualized in my head like I was pushing this all this nastiness like that I was feeling and depression and all this stuff like through one side, and then the other side it was like a filter, and it was bringing this like um new energy from the earth. And then but I felt better after that. I thought it was like maybe it was psychosomatic, like yeah, I feel better. But fast forward, like somebody sent me a link about I don't know, it was a shaman or something like in a forest, but they were talking about that practice, and this was like 4 months later, and I was like, I how do what is that, right? What is that? What is intuition? What is that feeling that you feel that is coming from it, and then you listen to it, and then it's something that's been verified by others that have come before you.
Yep.
That feeling, that connection, um, that there's something to that, and the most of science, since they can't replicate it or prove it, it's kind of just like thrown off the shelf. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Um,
But intuition is a skill. And like any skill, the more you practice it, the better you get at it, in my opinion. So it's absolutely real.
yeah. So being that you've kind of, and I thought that was fascinating how you grew up. So there was uh, like it was kind of brought up in your family, like working with, soil and plants and all these different understanding. So like that connection, like touching them and stuff like that gave you a different fond respect and understanding like of the world around you. As opposed to me, I grew up with I guess city life, right? And where even animals were not treated as equal in my household growing up. And granted, they probably learned those from their parents and so forth and so on. But like our dogs got um whatever scrap food, or like we didn't even buy dog food for them, right? We just gave them whatever scraps we had. Most of the times they went hungry, I'm pretty sure. They can just kind of just roam the streets. And fast forward, Lotus, my pup now, and she gets like some of the best food, and it's just because that, and I treat her, I pet her, I give her kisses and stuff like that, and like on her forehead and stuff like that. And it's fascinating how growth in yourself kind of relates to growth in others around you, and it affects them in that positive way or a negative way, right? If we don't choose to fix the things within ourselves, it kind of is put outwardly in the how we treat others around us. And I attribute that through nature and that found respect and getting out in it, immersing myself in it. And that was a byproduct that I didn't expect mountain biking to bring to me. You know, that was definitely a positive one, but I don't know if any of what I just said makes sense, but I feel like I kind of jumped around a little bit.
No, it's absolutely. I think it's right on track too with what we've been talking about, and I agree. I think that nature is incredibly healing. It's something that I go back to all the time, from everything from physical fatigue and just needing to recharge. And not, I'm not talking about going out and doing anything. I'm talking about just going out, what I call re-earthing. I used to do this when I was a kid, and even after we moved to Colorado, and I was a young teen, kind of preteen and teenager. I still garden duties, man. I mean, we were grew up in a pretty big family, but we were kind of like slave labor for the family. Right? It was like, we worked hard all the time, and we were always remodeling houses. And looking back, I learned a lot of stuff. I learned a lot about construction. I learned about gardening. I learned about things that I'm glad I learned about in retrospect. But at the time, it was like, oh my God, don't let anybody catch me outside, or, like doing anything that could be thing is I don't have anything to do, or I'm going to be working. And so,
Right.
but I remember in the spring having to, I always tilled the garden. It was my mom. I wish I knew what I knew now about composting and no-till and so forth, because I could have really have taught my mom some techniques that she would, I think, really have loved to learn and to use about gardening that I think are more advanced than what we did. But every spring we go out and till up the soil. And of course, we had really crappy, like that bentonite clay soil that we always had to add, sand and stuff into to be able to make it to be able to grow better. But I would go out there and I would just like stand in this dirt, in the spring with my bare feet, and contract and relax my feet into it, just basically like digging in the dirt with my feet. And it was an
Grounding.
incredible feeling of what I call re-earthing. And so it became later in life that when I was just, there were times where my fatigue levels were just from just working all the time, and just insane, I would say uses of my energy through things that I had to get done or whatever, where I would do that, just go out and find a place in the woods and just lie down in the dirt, on the right, straight on the ground, and just lie there and just soak up whatever is there in the earth. And hopefully, if there's some sunlight, that's part of it too. And that has always been incredibly healing to me on a level that is far deeper than what you're going to get from taking anything or medication or an herb or anything like that. There's a profound connection there that is between our species and this planet, that without it, we'd be dead. If people just don't seem to get it. If the earth didn't provide us with what we need to live, we would not be here as a species. And we may not be, we may not be here in 100 years. We may not be here in 50 years. We may not be here in 1,000 years. I don't know. But one of the main reasons will probably be because the planet doesn't support our life form anymore, because we fail to understand that and just accept that and realize it as a base foundation of what we're doing. Doesn't mean you have to be a hippie, a pot smoking dope hippie, liberal, whatever, all the crap that comes out that divides us, right? I mean, there's plenty of conservative people who should understand that, especially if they're going to rural America, where our food comes from, what it takes to grow our food, what it takes. And we do this too. I mean, we grew rabbits. We aren't right now, but chickens, rabbits, and even at the school down there, we had goats for a while, and we've always did harvesting classes, and obviously very respectful. How do you work with your food, whether it's hunting or whether it's raising, that connects you to the planet? And there's definitely a gap there when all you have to do is go into the grocery store on aisle 13 and pick your meat out, and it's like it does not connected to this living creature that went through all the stuff it went through to be able to give us that food. So that connection, I don't care, it doesn't matter what side of the political spectrum in this country you're on. It's all bullshit, in my opinion, the way that we've divided all of that up. And there's freaks on both sides that we should stop listening to completely, shouldn't be getting any kind of airtime. But if we get to just the kind of concept of, we are a species that needs air that's clean, we need water that's clean, we need food that's clean, we need to understand where that comes from and respect that and love that. There's a certain kind of biophilia, it's what it could be called, of love of life, that has to be there too in order for us to survive. So, that, I think, without that, we're probably doomed as a species. And so hopefully we'll get there.
Yeah, I agree 100%. Amen to that. Like, it's that reconnection because we're just disconnected spiritually, naturally, like on so many different levels, and it's just finding that balance, right? I mean, granted, we're probably never gonna get rid of technology, right? I mean, unless we have an EMP or something, that's a whole different conversation. But it's like, how do we find that like that balance within everything, right? Like, too much of anything is a bad thing. Uh, but it's just trying to find for ourselves individually how do we coexist with and not like exploit and like overuse and just you know um harvest everything to the point where we don't have anything left. Um, that's what it is, right? Like and that's why one of the reasons I started picked up a bow. I asked my brother; he's a hunter, um, uh, and I was like, I want to learn how to use a bow because I really want to start to learn how to process. I want to in my perfect world, I would love to kind of just go out like hike or trek or whatever the proper term is, like 50 miles or whatever, and just find game, process it and come back. Maybe 50 miles is a little bit much to start out with, but either way, that's my goal is to just kind of go track and all these things. And I'm not saying I understand. I don't think I have any false understandings of what that entails. I know it's rigorous, especially like if you do process it and you do bring it back, you got to bring it back in sections. And so either way, it's like I wanted to back to the point of to for myself because at some point we could preach from the mountaintops, right? And say we need to do all these things, but if you're not doing it yourself or not learning how to do it and teach others it's like in the military, right? Lead by example.
Yeah.
So if you're not doing these things, then how can you talk about them? But it's me for me right now. One of the purposes of this podcast, and there's like many different. Um, it's like a catch-all, and it's also to talk about these ideas and talk about like how to go about it going forward. And it's also meeting people like yourself that are actually doing it and try to learn from others that have been doing it for some time, and then kind of educate myself and then educate my family and so forth and so on. Affect my circle right in a positive manner.
Yeah.
But I know I don't know the answers. And one thing I did learn in the military is you're not going to have all the answers, but if you get all the smartest people in the room, maybe you'll come up with a good answer, collectively. And that's us as a species, as humans, is um, we need to lean on each other to get anywhere in life. We can't do it on our own. You can do it on your own, but it's a lot harder. So if you could find that circle, that tribe, if you will, kind of go back to it. And we could talk more about that some other time. Uh, but yeah, there's just this intuitive pull that I've had for the past 4 years. Like just something's been telling me like prepare, prepare. I don't know what that means, but I've been trying to do all those things, and it's like trying to find people like yourself that are actually doing that, can live off the land and all these things. But I don't know. You know, I know I don't know everything, but I know that some people do know some stuff, and I can learn from those people,
Yeah.
and I
That's
can teach them whatever I know.
right. Exactly. Yeah, it does. I agree. Community is where it's at. I think you have to recognize that first. That's difficult sometimes. It depends on where you're at in life. Different people. I used to be very think I could do everything on my own. And now I realize, and as I grew in the school, I realized you can't. You have to have a community in order to make this happen. And I think we
Right.
can. I think that you're right. It doesn't mean I'm not saying we don't need technology. I think we absolutely can use technology in the best of ways. In the best of ways, we could solve all of our problems with the tools we already have. There's no question about it. It's just we don't have a social structure or a cultural structure that allows us to do that very well, unfortunately, and that's a whole nother conversation. But yeah, I think that there's both hope, but there's also sometimes a lot of despair about our situation as a species, in my opinion.
Right. Definitely. And at the same time, like I know what you're talking about, and it's for me, it's like a lot of this stuff is out of my control, but what is in my control? What can I do to set myself up in the best ways that I can? And I'm not just talking about doom and gloom. I'm just talking about in general. Just even if let's say in the next 5 years, it's like I'd rather be wrong about my feelings than right about them. But even if I'm wrong, I still want to know these things, right? I still want to know how to process, how to harvest, how to get deeper in nature and really try to understand it. Get back to um, our roots, so to speak. there was a book I read. It was called "The Rise and Fall of the Comanches." God, I'm gonna forget it. I was looking around to see if I have it. Um, and it's just talking about, because I used to fantasize about the idea of like growing up as a native and stuff, and I mean, and there's a lot of things that I learned in that book, uh, Empire of the Summer Moon, Empire
Mm,
of the Summer Moon,
okay.
and so he talks about the rise and fall of the Comanches, but it also talks about like the reality of Quanah Parker and all these things that happened then, and the warring of the tribes, and when the British came over and started to settle, and the settlers, and all these different things, all these different nuanced conversations and subjects. But even then, we were warring. You go back to the Roman Empire. We've always been a warring tribe, but at the same time, like they also had a different. I think they started to kind of find this balance within it, where that book also talked about when these technologies started to come over, and like how the natural ways of how they coexisted within nature started to change as well, because they started to adopt like just the rifle, right? The rifle on its own started to kind of separate them from uh, how they uh, hunted in nature, or how they went about nature and with themselves and all these different things. But it's pretty fascinating. Within that, though, what I was trying to get to was, it made me understand that we are capable of so much more, in the sense of like, to read about how the Comanches were on horseback when the horse came over, I think from like Spain, or when they came over and they saw how they were riding horses, how they were like hanging off the side, holding on with their feet. They had a 14-foot spear in one hand and a bow in the other one, and they're coming around and like firing their arrow. And I was just like fascinated in how they would ride for like 500 miles. They would just uh, chug a bunch of water to the point of throwing up, and ride about 500 miles to whatever like water sources they had.
Mhm.
But what that told me was, we are capable of, like, we don't have to necessarily, yes, we need water and we can go without, but it gave me an understanding like how long we can survive without water, and like under the most, austere environments and climates and what have you. And maybe I took it too far, but I started like a lot of the races I did. I would drink a lot of water beforehand, and I didn't drink water the rest of the race. And as hot as it gets here in Texas, it's probably not smart, but I was really like testing myself. And more often than not, I was good to go. You know what I mean? I think because I accepted the idea that I can still get water if I needed to. I'm still within a certain range of water. And so if I start feeling whatever, then I can go get it. But I mean, I did the things necessary to properly like hydrate beforehand. And then I would chug the water before the race, and then I would, race, and then I would drink water afterwards. But that's started to like teach me, and my body started to adjust to it. And I don't recommend anybody listening to go do that. To each their own. If you want to try it, that's on you. Um, but it just gave me this understanding, because we have the same biology, we have the same anatomy as them. Granted, they lived in different times, they were a little bit more conditioned to that way of life, but it just kind of broke down the walls of like this what we've been taught, in the sense of like, need to have these things in order to survive. And yes, those things are true, but we can go a lot longer, a lot further, and we're capable of so much more than I guess I originally understood, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. Totally.
So it's just like understanding that, and kind of really trying to push your limits uh, within reason. I guess like in peacetime, like in training, right? You rather train in peacetime, yeah. So that way, when like shit hits the fan, you kind of know you're not having to learn those things, when
Yeah.
it's not peacetime anymore. But
Right.
yeah,
Train like you fight. Yeah.
yeah, exactly. But Sam, I mean, if there's anything else you want to get into, we can. But if not, we could we could always have this conversation another time, get into other things.
Sure. Yeah, we
Um,
can have another one sometime, man. We've definitely covered a lot of stuff, and I feel like I've
yeah,
talk
Yeah.
myself out here for today, but
So where can people find you?
sure, you can find me on herbalmedics.academy as a school. Herbalfirstaidgear.com is our store. So herbalmedics.academy or herbalfirstaidgear.com. And then my book is called Herbal Medic. You can get that on Amazon. If you just Google my name, Sam Coffman, you'll come up with all that stuff too. That's pretty much most of it.
Okay. Well, I appreciate your time, Sam. I appreciate your all the knowledge. I know there's a lot we didn't cover. Hopefully, sometime in the future, I can go hang out with you for a little bit and go just follow you along and help you in every way I can and try to learn from you in whatever way I can. The place you got there is real beautiful, and I look forward to seeing it grow and following you along on social media and see how things are panning out for you.
Yeah, thank you, Simon. It was great talking to you too. I look forward to maybe talking again. And yeah, you guys are always welcome up here too. So
Yes, sir. Well, I appreciate your time. Have a good one, and go seek out Sam's book and give him a follow on Instagram and check out what he's doing over there. Bunch of good stuff.
great. Yes. Thank you. Take care.
Thank you. All right, let me push stop. Thank you for listening and watching this podcast with Sam Coffman. If you feel this podcast has helped you in any kind of way or brought some new information to you or can help somebody else that you know of, please forward or share this podcast. Click like and subscribe. That helps with the algorithm on YouTube or whatever platform that you're listening to this on. And thank you for your support. Appreciate your time. To the next one. All right, out.